Hi, Nick Rains from Leica Camera Australia here. This video will be about the Leica Q3M, and normally I would have done a first look video because I do get these cameras ahead of release, but circumstances didn't allow me to go out shooting with the camera in any meaningful way, so I wanted to wait for an opportunity to actually get out and take some decent pictures with it. So this is more of a look back at the camera. What does monochrome mean? What's it like to shoot with it? How should we set the exposure? And I'll show you some images at the end of the day. Plus a little bit of history about where the monochrome camera comes from. And of course, what does monochrome even mean in terms of the technology? So let's get to it. Well, I've got the Q3 here and I have the Q3M here, and you'll see that this one has no red logo on it and this one has the red logo. That's how you can tell them apart. Q3M has this lovely matte finish to it, very stealth, very smooth. Love the look of it, but the important bits are all inside because everything else is pretty much the same. It's the same lens, it's the same controls, it's the same menu system. The difference being this one records only in black and white and this one records in color. Okay, so I'm going to go to my training slides here and let's just get into that, looking at the Q3 Monochrom. And here's a nice little quote from Leo Tolstoy. All the variety, all the charm, all the beauty of life is made up of light and shadow. Now that, of course, is effectively what black and white photography is because there's no color distractions. What you're left with is tone, texture and shape. And that to me is the beauty of black and white. So before we jump into it, I just want to make a point that when you're working with a Leica Monochrom camera, you are committing to black and white photography. You'll find that you are seeing what works in black and white. So yes, you can set a Q3 to shoot in black and white mode. In the JPEG settings, you can change it to black and white mode and the viewfinder will be in black and white. But you know at the back of your mind that you've always got the possibility to go back to the original color because even in black and white mode, this camera still captures a raw file in color. When you shoot with a monochrome, whether it's an M11 monochrome or a Q3M monochrome style camera, you have to commit to it. And I think that is the creative key to the whole process. So what do we mean by monochrome? Not monochrome, monochrome. That's the generic term. Monochrome is the camera, monochrome is a style of photography. First of all, single color, monochrome, one color. Doesn't necessarily mean gray. Okay, because we can tone pictures. You can have them slightly sepia, slightly cyan, which adds a mood to it. So technically, there can be a monochrome color picture. It's just that you haven't got all the colors. You just got one monochrome. Okay, so that will be used for a creative effect, and we'll come back to that point in a sec. Black and white specifically is grayscale. It's shades of neutral gray. So there is a distinction between monochrome and black and white. I know it's a little bit pedantic, but still it's important. So monochrome is single color. Black and white is grayscale through from the darkest black to the lightest white. Okay. As I said before, the key part of any sort of monochrome or black and white photography is it's all about light, shadow, shape, texture. It's not about color. Color can be a massive distraction, as I'm sure you're all aware. Simplifies the scene. I think that's a really important thing. You are eliminating the distracting color and all you're left with is that texture and shape, etc. So it simplifies the picture. It makes it slightly more abstract as well because you are stepping away from reality by removing the color because we don't see in black and white. Okay. You are stepping away from that. So you can argue that this is a slightly abstract process, which makes it just slightly more creative, maybe. There's also timeless aesthetic to it. There's a nostalgic feel to black and white. Old photographs are often in black and white. So there's still that connection psychologically to black and white photography. I think it's seen as slightly more arty, creative. It's hard to say. I've often struggled with my own I'm drawn to black and white photography myself, and I'm often struggle to see why, but I think it's because it looks a little bit more handmade, a little bit more artisan, even though, of course, it's still a digital camera and you might be making inkjet prints, but it just has that connection to it. All right, visual expressions of monochrome. So monochrome here, single color. This example here gives you a sense of how The left-hand side, which has a blue cyan tinge, looks colder than the right-hand side. Now, the right-hand side is neutral, whereas the left-hand side has a distinct cyan cast. Interestingly enough, if you compare them, you might think the right-hand side looks slightly warmer, but that's only in comparison to the left-hand side. So your eye gets used to the blue and you see the right-hand side as being slightly warm in comparison. In actual fact, and on your screen, it should be quite neutral, but that blueness gives it a cold feel. Snow, cold water, cold feel. Then you can go even further, and this is slightly magenta. And whilst this looks cold, it's also harsh. It's forbidding. Magenta is kind of not an ugly color. That's not really the right word, but it's not a pleasing color. It seems to me in this photograph to draw out the drama of the situation. Driving rain or driving snow in this case, dramatic weather, really quite, scary in a sense. This one's slightly warm, but more importantly, it's entirely relying on the shape, or that receding spiral staircase. It's all about the shape. I haven't got the original of this shot, but I suspect there's very little color in it anyway. So something to consider is if you are photographing something that doesn't really have any color, certainly not important color, maybe consider that this picture will either become a black and white if you're shooting in a color camera, or use the monochrome camera to capture it in pure black and white. And of course, portraits have this lovely, I know it sounds a little bit cliche to say oldie worldy feel, but it is kind of what I mean. And I do think that people look so much more interesting photographed in black and white from a traditional point of view. I really do feel that. And my personal preference is to shoot black and white. Commercially, for me, black and white's not terribly useful. Most of the work that I do commercially will end up in color. In fact, when I say mostly, I think probably 99.9% of it. But for me personally, for my own satisfaction, I like to shoot in black and white. Just a couple of pictures from the Leica archives as well. Sebastião Salgado, one of his amazing pictures from the Workers book, I believe, from Q8, 1991. This is a sort of picture that works so much better in black and white, of course. I mean, there's probably virtually no color in the shot anyway, because the guy's covered in oil. And this one, now I've had the great pleasure to meet Thomas Hupke on a couple of occasions, and I've seen the original of this printed at a Leica exhibition quite a few years ago. This is a print in the archive. This is the actual image. And to me, I just love this picture. It is almost the perfect black and white photograph because it's of something real. There can be no color. It's an old lady huddled up in a black cape in the driving snow. It looks cold. It's abstract, but it's also real. So for me, this is almost at the top of my preferences when it comes to black and white photographs. I just love this picture. Crystal Perkins. Now here we get to texture. We've got form. Being Bolivia, I suspect that wall is a bright color. It might be white, it could be yellow, it's hard to tell, but Bolivia architecture, it's known for bright colors. So eliminate those colors, and what you're left with is those lovely diagonal lines of glancing light, the texture of the wall, the shapes, the person just about to walk in front of that wall where it says prohibido. And so again, black and white, extract the color, remove it. What you're left with is the pure essence of the picture, the texture, the shapes, the form. All right, what do we mean by a monochrome sensor or a monochrome sensor in the sense of this camera? This is what a color sensor looks like in a sort of diagrammatic way. You've got the sensor array, which measures brightness. That's at the bottom. And that just measures brightness. Each of those photo sites measures the intensity or the brightness of the light that comes into it. On top of that, you've got a CFA, a color filter array, and you've got blue, red, and 2 green across the entire sensor. So each of the photo sites underneath is measuring one color. It's either measuring blue or red or green, but not all three at the same time. And this is, with very few exceptions, this is how color sensors work. And on top of that, you have a protective glass layer. When the color sensor is active, and when the light is falling on it, when it's been, during an exposure, you'll see how the blue is recorded on the left hand there as an array of blue pixels. In the center on the left, you've got the red, another array of red, but not the same pixels. and then the green is the other pixels. So you're only measuring the brightness of one particular color at one particular place. It's in the interpolation process that it becomes a 3-color image. And that means that each photosite has to calculate from the surrounding photosite what that color, what the other 2 colors should be. So blue becomes blue, red, and green by taking a very educated guess at what those colors should be. There's an inherent loss of sharpness in that process. And that is why the monochrome sensors are renowned for their pure sharpness, because there is no interpolation. That's very important to remember. So once you create a monochrome camera, you're taking out the CFA filter in the middle there, and you're just left with with a sensor that records brightness and nothing else, as you can see in this diagram here. So a monochrome sensor is completely colorblind. However, it does have a tonal sensitivity, or I should say a frequency sensitivity, like black and white film used to have. And so the blues, the reds, and the greens will create a certain grayscale value, and that might not be a straight line. I don't have a graph to show you here, but I believe that this particular sensor is not totally different to the old Kodak Tri-X film. It's baked into the sensor, that tonal response. So advantages, well, because there's no interpolation between photosites, you're getting a pure recorded image without any blurring between the photosites, because some interpolation is bound to introduce a little bit of loss of quality. It's small, but it's there, okay? And if you do try out the camera in comparison to a color one and you look really closely, you'll be astonished at just that beautiful edge crispness. I think in film terms, we might have used the word acutance. It's just razor sharp. It's not resolution. Now, resolution is a slightly different measure. This is definition of resolution. That's acutance, and that's a very important distinction. That's why they look so good. The other thing, of course, you can do if you want to change the relationship between the colors as they're recorded into grayscale is you can put a color filter on front of the lens. Okay, that means, and I'm sure in this particular slide, you'll see that if you put different color filters on the front, you get a different blue sky. So a red filter does not allow through blue light. The red filter cuts out the blue. That means that the blue values are reduced and you get a darker sky. This is your classic sort of Ansel Adams look, if you like. Yellow filter, not quite so strong. Orange filter, not quite so strong. Green filters can be quite good for skin because a lot of people have some magenta in their skin, particularly somebody with what we might call a drinker's nose, that sort of blush in the nose. That's kind of a magenta-y color. That will lighten that up, and you'll get a really nice skin tone. So green filters for skin, really effective. Okay, where do the monochrome cameras come from? Well, there's the history of the monochrome cameras, starting back in 2012 with the original M Monochrome, which was based on an M9 sensor, which I've used extensively, and it had a particular look which is really quite different to the modern CMOS sensors, because that was a CCD sensor back then. Now, of course, we've got the M10 monochrome, we've got the M11 monochrome. There was the original Q2 monochrome. There was never a Q monochrome. There's a Q2 monochrome, and now, of course, we have the Q3 monochrome. But they're all based on the same idea of removing that color filter array so that you get a pure result. So just a bit of an overview. I'm not going to go through the technical specifications, okay? We don't need to do that. You can just read that off the screen. All this stuff has been published, repeatedly over the last few months, no doubt. So I just want to get to some of the pictures I've been shooting with it. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the photographs I've been able to shoot with it over the last couple of weeks. I've been in Indonesia and had the opportunity to use the camera in some quite interesting locations. So let's just go through a few of these. And this video was recorded me in just full HD, but I've put the images in 4K. So it's a 4K video. So these images should look really crisp when you look at them full screen or at full size on your computer screen. Look at the skin tones here. I think you'll agree that they're absolutely beautiful. And looking right into this image, the eyelashes are absolutely razor sharp. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about setting exposures, but this is a sort of picture where the color, and I think you can imagine that these young ladies are wearing extremely bright colors, massively distracting. I was far more interested in their face and the shapes and the textures of their clothes than the actual color of their outfits, because it kind of detracts from their face, I think. Now, there's another place in Indonesia called Madura. There's something that I'd never seen before. It's basically a chassis with a massive dragon built on it, which includes a jazz band. And stepped up inside that, you can see these young men, they're playing trumpets, they're playing different instruments, making a fantastic noise, quite spectacular, bright colors, you name it. Never seen anything like it. And it works beautifully in black and white, because this particular dragon was mostly black and white. If I showed you the color version, you wouldn't look totally different to this, except for the shirts of the boys and obviously their skin tones, because the dragon itself was actually black and white. And you can see the face there. And I've used the wide aperture to just defocus the gentleman in the background. But again, I think it's all about the texture and the shape here, not so much the colors. There it is, full head on. Really quite spectacular. The whole thing also rocks. So it's on like springs. So as the musicians play and move around, the whole thing shimmies and twists. So it comes to life. Quite remarkable. Then inside the museum, which is next door to where this picture was, I came across some ceremonial knives. And this is where a monochrome style camera really comes into its own, because you're getting incredible detail. You're getting this wonderful tonality of this metal. I mean, they just look metallic in this shot. Something that you would never get in a color picture. So this is way better than any color picture I could have taken. Even converted from color, I don't think you'd get this incredible richness of tone. So that worked quite nicely. Then we went to a village where they make a lot of batik cloths, traditional weave cloths. The skirts those ladies are wearing are good examples of that. And they do a nice welcome dance when you arrive. And when I saw this with an overcast sky as well, I thought this is absolutely going to be superb for the Q3 Monochrom. So I took quite a few pictures. There's a couple of verticals I've just put side by side. Lot of shadow detail. Now, one thing this camera is really good at is capturing shadow detail. And in a sec, I just want to talk a little bit more about that. But for the moment, we'll just have a look at these pictures. Now, the picture on the right-hand side looks like it was taken with a 50mm lens, maybe. But that's because I've shot 28mm at f1.7. And because it's thrown the background and foreground out of focus, it makes it look like a slightly longer focal length lens. Another lady weaving there. I've used the diagonal lines to lead your eye towards her face. And again, check out the tonality on her face, because that's all available light. That's the window light coming in from A, from behind her, and B, to the left of the photograph. Went to another village where they do a traditional display, and these gentlemen were looking all fierce, drawing their swords. But again, just look at that skin quality. Look at the play of light on their faces. Again, a nice overcast day works incredibly well for these sorts of pictures, but their eyes are really nice and distinct. The skin looks wonderful. You can see the musculature on their arms. It really brings out the modeling there. Wonderful. So let's just talk a little bit about exposure and processing just briefly. This is not a technical review or anything like that, but I just want to pop out to Lightroom here, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the processing, because there's one thing I'd like to draw your attention to, which might help. Okay, let's have a look in Lightroom, and I want to show you how I'm using this camera in terms of exposure. Because there is no color array, you're not recording 3 different colors. And if you overexpose a monochrome sensor by even the slightest amount, as in you've got clipped highlights, you cannot recover it. It's the nature of that kind of camera. If you're using your camera, a color camera like I do, and I have my highlight warning set, I'm looking for flashing highlights. And then I know that my sky, for instance, usually is the sky, is just over the limit for clipping. But that's only the blue channel, because the sky is usually blue, or even clouds can be quite blue. I know that I've got the red and the green channels with still some data in them. So when I do recovery of highlights, I know that Lightroom can rebuild some of that texture. So a flashing highlight in a color camera whether it's clouds or a blue sky, isn't really clipped in the sky. On a monochrome camera, a clipped highlight is a clipped highlight, and there is no way of recovering that data. So you really want to expose your shots so that there is no important highlight clipping. Obviously, certain things will, like a bright light or the sun or something, but that's true of all cameras. But if you've got an image with some sky in it and you don't want a white cutout sky, you need to make sure that you maintain at least some density in that sky. So in this particular case, this is the original shot on the right. And let me just put this into the develop module. There it is. And if you look at the histogram on the top right-hand corner, you'll see that my sky was exposed just within the limits of the sensor. And if I move my mouse over the sky, you should be able to see the little magnifying glass moving around. You'll see that it's reading the brightest, get rid of that, somewhere around 95%. And you'll see that on that top left-hand corner, pure white, and then a little bit of gray. So I've got tone everywhere. Now, if I'd exposed it more, there'd just be a white cutout with no tone. And if you try and recover it, it either doesn't do it or it looks really fake. So you've got to protect your highlights. But obviously in this picture, the faces, the people are what you might call underexposed. And what that means is simply, it's not that they're underexposed, it's just that to fit the highlights in, I have to have what would be normally a mid-tone of skin and face has to be a certain distance below that, because that's contrast. And it seems to sit in about the quarter tones, not the lighter half tones that you'd expect, just because of the nature of the contrast. So what I tend to do, and I'm looking for this as the final result, and I've still got the same density in the sky, I've still got texture in the sky, but I've got a lot lighter a tone on the people. So what I do, go back to the original one, it's quite straightforward. I will push up the exposure by a good 2 stops. Let's go even further, 2.5 stops, and then I will pull down the highlights right to the beginning. So I'll go hard on both of those, and then I'll fine tune. And what I'm going to do is push the highlights back up till they're right as far as they can go. And then I'll adjust the exposure just a little bit to get something like that. So what I'm really doing, and if I was in Photoshop, I'd be applying a very, very strong lifted curve. What I'm looking for is leaving the highlights pegged, leaving the shadows pegged, but lifting the midtones. Now you could do this equally well. If I just reset that, you could do this in the tone curve. So let me just grab the middle of that tone curve and push it right up, right across like that. I might even have to put an extra control point in, something like that. I mean, that's getting really quite extreme, but because of the quality of the sensor and the amazing amount of shadow information, I'm just going to roll that highlight off. Something like that. You could do it that way, but I find using the sliders even easier. And you'll see I'm just starting to lose the sky to a certain extent, but I do have tone. Top left-hand corner, I've still got a distinction between the white of the background and the very, very bright gray in the sky, running about 98%. So it's right on the limit. But that really heavily lifted curve is what stretches out the shadows, opens up the shadows, pushes them towards the midtones, but rolls off the highlights dramatically. Okay, and that's what I do to almost all the pictures that are high contrast. Ones that are low contrast, like the ones I showed you before, they were relatively low contrast. You don't need to do that. But when you've got a high contrast situation, you must protect those highlights or choose to lose them completely. Okay, there's no real halfway house here. Once you've clipped a little bit, you might as well clip the whole lot and then bring up your midtones. It's just the nature of a monochrome camera. All right, well, that's it from me. I hope that little tip gives you something to work with. It's a beautiful, beautiful camera. There are some proof of performance prints in Leica stores in Australia here. I have done some prints to be displayed in the stores. And when you see the physicality of the prints and you look closely at them, it's really quite remarkable. Just not so much the resolution, but the definition of the resolution. Okay, so when I look at a picture taken with a monochrome camera versus the color version, the Q3, there is a distinction between the two. You can't quite emulate the Q3 converted, so the Q3 converted to black and white can't quite emulate the tonal response and the accutance of the Q3 Monochrom. It's not a massive difference. You wouldn't expect it to be. I mean, they're both 60 megapixel sensors. But if black and white's your thing, then this is the precisely targeted tool for you.